Today I'm going to be doing something a bit different. I'm going to be reading a chapter from my WIP, my work in progress, as a reward for you guys following me since I have now reached 1,000 subscribers. I've definitely stolen this idea from my friend Anna, who reached her own 1,000 subscribers the last month or so, and decided to reread her old novel that she'd written in 2017, 2018, I think. And it was such a fun experience to watch and just a nice little reward video for the people that decided to follow her that I thought it would be something that I wanted to copy for sure. So unfortunately, the one piece of work that I could actually read if I were to do something similar to hers is in French, and I'm not going to do that, or at least not right now. So instead, I decided to give you the choice between my 4 current work in progress, or WIPs, and ask you which one you would like me to read a chapter from. Most of them I suggested reading the first chapter of those, and one of them, The Art of Summoning Demons, I suggested reading a random chapter somewhere in the middle or early on, with a little bit of context for what you may have missed in the story so far, just so that I don't give you the first chapter, because I'm considering entering round 2 of querying for The Art of Summoning Demons, and therefore I don't really want to read out loud something that I'm going to be sending to agents. I don't know why. It might be fine and I should be able to do that, but it just made me feel a little bit weird to do that, so I decided not to do this. Instead, I will be reading a chapter somewhere a little bit further along that is not going to be a part of my query package. And yes, it is The Art of Summoning Demon, that one. Not by a lot, because quite a few people wanted me to read from Knights of Death. So I'm going to be reading 2 chapters actually from The Art of Summoning Demons, but they won't be chapter 1, so I need to give you a little bit of the context. They will be chapters 12 and 13. And just looking at my screen now, that would be page 64 out of 349 in my Word document. That's where it starts. So it gives you a little bit of an idea of where it starts in the story in terms of percentage. So it's still quite early on, and my main character, Olive, at the very beginning of the novel, she starts the novel by being in an interrogation room at the police station after she found her roommate dead in their room, in their dorm. So she is a freshman, she's a first-year student in this college that she decided to join mostly to follow her best friend. And they went to a sorority party the night before because her best friend is a legacy and wants to potentially join a sorority. And the morning after, she wakes up and finds her roommate dead in her bed. And there's also some weird occult type of symbols drawn in her blood, and so it adds onto the mystery. The thing is, Olive has seen those symbols before. They're not completely unknown to her. There are witches, covens on campus that are actually hiding as sororities. There's also a seance scene at some point that involves evil spirits. There's obviously demons as per the title. So there's a lot of supernatural creatures involved, but obviously all hidden in plain sight. So this is very much a contemporary type of fantasy, or an urban fantasy, although it's not really taking place in a town, it's taking place on a campus, like a college campus. At the beginning of the novel, we also learn that Olive's grandfather that she didn't really know has just died, so she went to London with her mother to visit him on his deathbed in the hospital, and he was dying from cancer. And he was a very strange, mysterious man who had a lot of intricate tattoos on him, and those tattoos are very similar to the occult symbols that she saw drawn in the blood of her roommate. So essentially, there's a bit of a supernatural mystery going on there. She is given by her grandfather's lawyer a key that she doesn't really know what it opens, but she receives this key, and later on she realizes that this key is probably linked to a bank that is in town called the Liddell Bank. So she decides to go to town to see this bank and try to figure out what the key opens. So these are the 2 chapters that happen in the bank. That's literally it. I feel like that's enough context, and that should give you plenty of information as to what's going on without spoilers, hopefully, if you ever want to read the book one day. Chapter 12. Olive didn't have to search too far to find the little bank, 2 street corners away from the site of the incident. The building looked old and prestigious, in the Greek Revival style popular in New England. There was a gold lettering engraving on the concrete above the double doors to show its name. Olive patted her elbow with a tissue before entering. She combed down some loose strands of hair with her fingers and made sure she didn't have any dirt on her clothes from the fall, then finally entered the bank. The interior of the building matched what she pictured for secret society meetings. The first thing to greet her was a double-story high ceiling. Olive wasn't worried about having to find a till and awkwardly explain why she was here to some poor clerk, who would just stare at her like she was crazy or worse, call security. This was a fancy place. The type of bank Grace would have loved, with a doorman who let her in politely and a reception desk at the front, followed by a series of booths where people were chatting in hushed tones to attentive staff members. Supporting the ceilings were Greek-style columns in the center of the room, a soft light seeping through tall windows, diffused by the tinted tiles. On the far wall to the back of the room, the name of the bank repeated in big golden letters, just like the engraving outside. Right underneath it, there was a faint inscription within the brick of the wall, closely resembling the motifs on Gregor's key. Marlowe hadn't lied. "Good afternoon, how may I help you?" asked a young woman when Olive stepped in front of the reception desk. Jenna read her name tag. Olive's mind reeled as she struggled to ask her question. The car crash had shaken her, and she fumbled with her words before getting the necklace out from under her t-shirt. "This is a bit of a weird one," she said, putting the key down in front of the receptionist. "I've received this key from my grandfather who passed away recently. Someone mentioned that the same symbols could be found at the bank." The clerk's face paled. "Of course," she rushed to say, her expression turning meek and apologetic. "I am so very sorry, miss. Please forgive me for the misunderstanding." Olive found herself too stunned to reply. Jenna didn't seem to notice, though, and stepped around the reception desk. "Please follow me. The reception for our special customers is through the other entrance, but I'd be delighted to show you the way." "Special customers?" But the young woman was already showing Olive into a side hallway. The floor here was a warm-colored marble, and the walls covered in wood panels, elegant and modern sconces hanging in between what looked like 18th and 19th century paintings, providing some muted mood lighting. "What am I doing here?" wondered Olive. But curiosity won, and she let the clerk guide her until they reached the floor-to-ceiling wooden door, carved into an intricate pattern of leaves and exotic birds. The door had a plaque on it. "Special Request Office. Opening hours, Monday, Friday, 9 a.m., 7 p.m. Saturday, 9 a.m., 2 p.m. Sunday closed. Night schedule upon request." Jenna knocked twice on the door, smiling nervously at Olive. "Come in," said a muffled, faraway voice. The clerk opened the door and nodded encouragement to Olive. Olive breathed in, the confusion paralyzing her brain. She wondered if it was a monumental waste of time. She sighed, then pushed the door all the way open and let herself in. Might as well see this through. All she had to do was ask about the symbols again, show the key, then leave if they didn't have any answers for her. The room was big, lined up with tall bookshelves carved in the same dark wood as the front door. It looked more like a small library than the reception of a bank. It smelled of old books and cigars, and she spotted a decanter full of amber liquid on one shelf. She hadn't known Gregor at all before the summer, but she somehow knew her grandfather would have felt just at home in this room. "How may I help you, young lady?" boomed a voice from the center of the room. A man stood up from behind an enormous antique desk, looking much more in charge than Jenna had. He looked to be in his late 50s, with grey temples, a well-tended goatee, and donning a sharp Italian suit. His hands clasped in front of him were adorned with several heavy-looking rings. "Sorry to bother you," she said after a beat, coming closer to the desk. She still had the key hanging in front of her t-shirt, and the man's eyes sharpened as he glimpsed it. "I'm not sure I'm in the right place. My name is Olive Mathers." "Of course," the man said with sudden understanding. "Welcome to the Liddell Bank, Miss Mathers. My name is Philip Carradine." He walked around the desk and presented his hand for her to shake. She did so, her grasp firm. "Your grandfather was an esteemed member of our establishment, and we dearly regret his loss. I'd like to extend my most sincere condolences to you and your family." Olive whisked her hand back quicker than she would have liked to, a gasp on her lips. Philip smiled at her knowingly. How did this man know about Gregor? "Please, have a seat. Before we can take you to the vaults, we need you to sign a few papers." "The vaults?" He extended an arm towards the big dark green leather armchair in front of the desk, and she sat down automatically. Ignoring her question, he went to grab a thick pile of papers from one of his drawers and presented them to her with a small smile. "The vaults, yes," he repeated, staring straight at the key. Olive gulped. The vaults, the key. She was about to get some answers, or some more questions. She took the papers he was handing her, feeling like she was about to sign her soul away to the devil. Skimming over the document, she looked for clues before signing it. At first, nothing jumped out of the ordinary. There was a first signature needed at the bottom of the page, detailing the previous owner of the deposit box must be, in fact, deceased. Then, something to confirm she was the rightful heir or benefactor. The following pages required her details for registration as a new member of the bank. Then she reached a page entitled Confidentiality. Olive almost choked out a laugh. Is this paragraph here seriously promising torture, injury, and or death if I talk about any confidential information regarding those vaults? This Philip guy had got to be kidding, right? But no, he looked at her with a glint of amusement in his eyes. A shiver of fear ran down Olive's spine. It goes both ways, Miss Mathers, he said in a reasonable tone. Our employees have to make equal promises to our customers, but rest assured, nothing of the sort has been necessary for at least the past 50 years. Olive stared. He was, for all accounts, deadly serious. How was this legal? How could a respected bank put such clauses in its contract? She weighed her options in her mind. She could leave right now and never look back. It didn't seem like this Philip Carradine guy would try to stop her, but then she'd be back to square one with no answer to her growing list of questions. Olive let her pen hover over the spot for her signature, hesitating for the slightest of seconds. She thought the man would make a superb poker player. His face was unreadable, void of all expression. Fuck it, she wanted to solve this mystery. Plus, who would she want to tell anyway? Olive scribbled her signature right over the line in one quick stroke of her pen. Excellent, said Philip, as if he'd expected no less. Now, let me show you where your grandfather's vault is located. Chapter 13. As expected, they had to go underground. They squeezed themselves inside a small, ornate 1900s elevator with a brass accordion door, and Olive almost expected to see a valet of sorts operating the lift. They stopped at the 3rd floor down, and the doors opened. Down there, Olive truly experienced the contrast with the first room that she'd walked in, bathed in the late summer sunlight. The hallway they stepped in was gloomy in comparison, despite the elegant Greek columns and oil paintings sprucing it up. They passed several doors on their way to the vaults, walking down the hall for an eternity. In the darkly lit corridor, under the watchful eyes of the many portraits hung on its walls, Olive couldn't help but wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. When they stopped and entered a large room, she did her best to hide her surprise. Unlike what she'd expected, the vaults weren't vaults at all. There were simple safety deposit boxes going from floor to ceiling on each wall, the type she'd seen before in movies. The only real vault here isn't accessible to the public, said Philip Carradine, as if he could read the disappointment on her features. Which one belonged to Gregor? Asked Olive. Number 3. He pointed at one of the first boxes on her left, where she saw an elegant cursive 3 inscribed into a gold plaque. I expected something else, I don't know, like number 256? Gregor inherited his vault from his father, who inherited it from his own father before him, who, well, you can guess the rest. The Mathers have been clients of ours for generations, and we appreciate consistency. But Gregor lived in London, said Olive, frowning. Indeed, and we have many branches overseas. The man wasn't talking about the bank, she knew. What was she getting herself into? The founding members, said Philip, range from the first vault up to vault number 13. We will always reserve these for their descendants wherever they go. If you set foot in the Liddell Bank branch in London, there will be a vault number 3 waiting for you there. Olive remembered the card that Gregor had left her. Didn't it have locations written on one side? Was this about the Liddell Bank? Maybe her grandfather had tried to tell her where she could use the key he'd left with it. Is there anything inside this box? What were the chances of him using the box in Fulton instead of the one in London, where he'd lived and died? Would the key work in this branch? She knew from Grace that her family had been at the same university she now attended, which had probably helped her get in, despite her average grades. But Grace was always so secretive, so guarded. She hadn't known a thing about her grandparents before the summer, except for their names. I will leave you to find out, said Philip. You may use the phone here if you require anything, and the lift will operate with no key or code of any sort. The phone in question was an old brass candlestick telephone propped up in the middle of the room, on the small, otherwise empty table. She doubted the thing even worked, and no signal down here. The knowledge raised the hair on the back of her neck. But Olive ignored her anxiousness and nodded with fake confidence at the man. Philip left Olive to face the box again. He'd said founding members. What had he meant by that? Founding members of what? The bank? Wouldn't Grace have said something if they were heirs to a big international private bank? She wasn't poor by any means, but she was also not heiress rich. Olive took the key from around her neck. She had little hope of finding anything in the locker box anymore, but a sliver of curiosity pushed her to go on, so she put the key inside the lock and opened it. Olive paused. There was something there. She took the box out of the locker and placed it on the table, her heart now racing. A book, wrapped in some dark grey linen cloth, hidden away. For a strange, instinctual reason, Olive knew this mattered. She opened the linen cloth, her heartbeat thumping in her ears like a drum. It looked heavy and old. The cover on the book was all black leather, engraved with thin line symbols, just like the ones she kept seeing everywhere. It's got to be an antique, she considered, running her hand along the ridged spine. Ars Goetia, she read out loud. The words decorated the center of the cover in big gold letters, followed by a smaller inscription. By Johann Mathis. Then, at the bottom, in a similar cursive font, Memento Mori. Olive recognized the same sentence her grandfather had used, as well as the lawyer, Arthur Weyer. Remember you must die. Goetia, however, meant something else. She had only heard this term once, when Professor Marlowe had told her about the occultist practices of the Renaissance aristocracy in Europe. The art of summoning demons. She shivered at the idea. Olive let her mind go through the motions for a minute. Demons aren't real, there's no such thing as conjuring them, and Goetia might mean 1,000 other things. But she wasn't so certain anymore. She didn't need to torture her mind over it. She could just as well open the book and see for herself. Hopefully, some delusional diary by her faraway ancestor, this Johann Mathis. The book's closing mechanism comprised a gold clasp, also engraved with an elaborate labyrinth of thin lines. She tried to open it. Nothing. Yet there was no keyhole there. So shouldn't it have just opened with a push of the button? Had she missed something? She peered at the clasp, trying to analyze the mechanism up close, when everything went dark. Fuck! The word escaped her lips with no warning. There was a moment of complete darkness, then dim greenish light came to life. It must have been a sort of backup generator, like in hospitals. She forced herself to stay calm and reached for her phone before remembering she had no signal below the ground floor of the bank. Olive took the antique phone's receiver and held it to her ear, but the line was dead. Great. What else could she do? She wrapped the book back in its cloth and slid it into her handbag. Just as she was closing the locker box with her key, she heard a faint noise. Olive froze. It was as though someone was in the room with her and had shuffled from one foot to the other, a small noise of fabric against fabric. But she'd been certain no one had entered the room since Philip had left. Just to be sure, though, Olive looked around, narrowing her eyes to see better in the dim light of the backup generator. Nothing. No one there. No one lurking in the darkness. The noise resounded again, closer this time. Olive closed the locker in one swift movement, put the key back around her neck, and stepped outside of the room. Her heart beat a frantic rhythm, and she kept her breathing under control, not wanting to make too much noise in case she heard it again. She eyed the small lift at the end of the corridor and took a deep, shaky breath. The hallway was much creepier and grimmer in this light, and she felt on edge. What if the killer who'd murdered Vanessa had followed her here? She hadn't accepted Sam's theory of the prison escapee earlier, but now she wasn't in broad daylight in a public space full of people anymore. Olive started walking to the elevator, trying not to run, but still walking faster than normal, her eyes darting back to the dark end of the hallway behind her at every second step she took. She felt observed and tried to tell herself it must be the cameras in the hallway. Then she saw it, and at first her brain didn't register what she'd seen. It was a subtle movement, and she only caught it at the corner of her vision. I'm going crazy, she thought. Yet she checked again, just to confirm she'd imagined it, just to reassure herself. There, the painting on the wall. Its eyes were following her, like those funny illusions people talked about, where it just looked that way. But Olive didn't think this was an illusion, because as she'd seen it an instant before, the eyes on the painting blinked at her. Olive ran. There was a rattling sound, and the thing, whatever it was, started jumping from painting to painting, making them move against the wall, following her with a multitude of eyes. No, 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 she thought. The hair on the back of her neck rose, and the fear gripped at her insides, making her want to double over and vomit. She was almost at the elevator now, and the paintings were moving faster, the thing reaching the last one, at the very end of the hallway. It wasn't just the eyes. The fabric of the canvas was undulating under some strange force, and horror struck her as the hand of the portrayed man reached outside of the frame, its bony fingers grasping at the edge, its eyes bulging out of their socket, the whole thing so excruciatingly slow that she thought time had stopped and she wasn't running anymore. But she was, and she slammed with force into a very solid, very alive body. Miss Mathers, are you all right? Philip Carradine stared at her with concern in his eyes. No, scratch that. Fake concern. That's what it was. There was something, she started, her voice shaking. Yes, said Philip, cutting her off. We had a slight problem with our electricity, I'm afraid, which is why I came back to check on you. I trust everything went well with vault number 3. He still had his hands on her shoulders, and she realized that the paintings had stopped moving, and that she looked like a crazed woman. Thank you, she said slowly. I appreciate it. I'm terrified of the dark, so yeah. That was the only lie she could think of, and Philip didn't question it. Both of them were lying to each other, and they both knew it. Of course, let me take you back upstairs. He guided her with a hand on her back, as she was still looking behind her, her brows furrowed in confusion. Had she hallucinated this? Was she somehow concussed from the earlier accident? A part of her feared finding out she was going mad, but a bigger part was terrified that she was not. They entered the lift, and Olive gazed at the paintings in the hallway. No hand, no word canvas stretching, no blinking, no movement at all. Do you need anything else from us today, Miss Mathers? No, thank you, she said with as much composure as she could muster. She did not need Philip Carradine's help or pretend help. What she needed was to do as Sam had said and go visit Dr. Young. Okay, that was it. That was the 2 chapters I thought I would read from my book, The Art of Summoning Demons. I hope that you enjoyed those. But yeah, that's it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, enjoyed this little reward, this thank you for following me on YouTube and bring me up to 1,000 subscribers. I'm so very grateful. It is so fun to have this little community of people that I can talk to about my writing, and I am very, very happy about being able to do something like this to thank you guys. So on this note, if you enjoyed this video and this kind of content, consider subscribing to my channel, like the video, leave a comment down below. I always try to respond, ring that bell, all that jazz, and I will see you guys in the next one.